Don't think I'm on Twitch. And I don't care if you guys don't like the multi-streaming. Anyway, this is a video called The Entire History of Reaper, and this is by a funny-looking squash. And it kind of hurts to watch these things, honestly. A lot of times me and one of the other developers don't get mentioned. Sometimes we do. Most of the time we don't. But let's just see how this goes, okay?
Hey guys, before the video starts, we've just opened up a Discord server for the Squash community to talk about production, videos, and music, so if you'd like to join, the link will be in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks, now on to the video. Reaper is one of the new kids on the block when it comes to DAWs. Just like when you have a household full of older brothers, the youngest one tends to get the short end of the stick. However, I think we should give Reaper a fair shake and dive into the history of one of the younger contenders in the music software industry.
Do I have to say a fallacious argument from antiquity? Not.
Most audio workstations were first released or had precursors in the 90s or even earlier, like Cubase and Pro Tools. Contrary to that, Reaper was released in 2006 by the company Kakos. Things were weird in 2006. Twitter had just launched, Enron was on trial for conspiracy and fraud, and we had a spinach-related E. coli outbreak in the States. Anyways, I was always drawn to this program simply because of the name. I mean, it's a kinda badass name for a program. Reaper was originally an acronym for Rapid Environment for Audio Production, Engineering, and Recording.
It's still an acronym for it. Not just originally.
Since it was so late to the party for music software, the original version of Reaper was offered basically for free just to get the—
That's not why it was offered basically for free. It was offered basically for free because that's just how Justin is. And yeah, he really believed in stuff like that. And not free, it's honorware. But he wanted to be fair. And it's not because it was late to the party. I mean, well, anyway, we could really go into why Reaper was made, but it's not because it was late or whatever. It's Reaper was made because the existing DAWs weren't doing what we wanted to do.
The name out there and people using it. The developer—
It wasn't put out for free to get people to get the name out there at all. Not one bit, not in any way, shape, or form.
Of Reaper named Justin Frankel decided to start his own company after leaving Nullsoft, which is another company he also founded in '97. His stated goal when creating Reaper was simply to put the user first above all else. This is blatantly apparent in almost every aspect of the program, all the way down to its price. Presently, Reaper sells for $225, but you can get a discounted license if you're an individual not using it for commercial use, or you're a nonprofit organization. Starting out, it was very bare bones and only came with the essentials and was basically a sandbox for you to work with. I'm not opposed to a program—
Well, you could say that, but it came with the essentials that any other DAW did. It came with a compressor. Actually, as far as I know, it's probably the first compressor and gate that actually meant to sidechain right off the bat, because Reaper already had internal routing, which nobody had at the time, I don't think, and still don't have for the most part. There's a claim that Cakewalk can do some of that, but I know Cubase can't, Nuendo can't. Pro Tools sort of can. You can kind of route your way around it. I don't think Studio One can. But no, it's not like it was bare bones. Most DAWs out there still haven't caught up to a lot of Reaper's features. So this is not really saying it the right way. Remember, Reaper wasn't made to catch up to anybody else. It was made because the other DAWs weren't entering the 21st century when they should have been.
program having few stock sounds, but I think that it does—
Reaper wasn't meant to have any stock sounds. Reaper is not a sequencer as a DAW. It didn't come with virtual instruments, and you know, I guess most DAWs come with virtual instruments now. I think actually Reaper does as well, but you know, the point is to use whatever virtual instruments you wanted to use, not come with ones. But like, you know, programs like Logic come with killer virtual instruments, but again, those are more for music creation and MIDI sequencing. Reaper was made to be mixing console, razor blade, and tape recorder.
Does make it a lot harder to
And patch bay. Most things, just the routing. I know routing is still a joke in most DAWs, sorry. But it was made to have insanely powerful routing. So let me start this up again.
only came with the essentials and was basically a sandbox for you to work with. I'm not opposed to a program having few stock sounds, but I think that it does make it a lot harder to learn when you have to figure out how to download free third-party plugins and samples.
No, this is dumb. Any DAW is going to have... Reaper had the same plugins as any other DAW had. It actually made it easier to work with other plugins than most DAWs did because it struggled so hard to be more compatible than anybody else for whatever kind of plugins you could get. It even had DirectX back in the day. I don't know if they still do.
But I digress. More interestingly though, Justin Frankel has a long history of creating things before Reaper, so let's travel back to peer into the doorway of a pre-Reaper Justin Frankel. In his high school years, Justin described himself as programming just for fun. However, the first time he realized his programs could be used for a multitude of purposes and by many people was when he started writing programs for other students to use in his school. His first large-scale project in high school was creating his own local email service for students to send emails to each other during school hours. Interestingly, during this time in his life, he had no real connection to the music industry and was entirely on the programming side of things. It wouldn't be until much later that he decided to pursue music-related endeavors and eventually create Reaper. But before Reaper though, he had created an app called Winamp in 1997, which was one of the...
If anybody doesn't know this, so here's the craziest thing. When I first met Justin, I just thought he was some struggling dude. Maybe he was in college or something, and he didn't have any money, and he's making this really cool thing called Ninjam. And I was like, man, I feel bad for this guy. I was poorer then than I am now, and I'm not rich now. But I mean, I had nothing back in the day. I did have an RME 9652 though, and I spent my last $10 that I had in my in the world. I didn't have a bank account, nothing. I spent my last $10 to go to the post office and send Justin this RME 9652 audio interface because I wanted to make sure he had a good audio interface to program with. And he says, oh, you don't have to do that. But I was like, yeah, I do. And like I think a couple weeks later, he says, hey, you got a 7-Eleven near you? I'm like, yeah. He says, go look at the Rolling Stone. And I don't remember if it was on the cover or if it was one of the articles, but it said the world's most dangerous geek, and like he had like $40 million or something. He sold Winamp or Nullsoft or whatever to AOL. He had a pile of money. And here I am spending the last $10 of my name, send this guy this audio interface. Man, oops.
Earliest media players. His stated reason for creating the program was because the media players before this on Windows did not have the feature list he wanted, like creating playlists.
Right, so just like Reaper, it's not that we're going to make something free so everybody could use stuff. No, we didn't like what was out there. We had to make something better.
He would sell Winamp 2 years later to AOL for a huge $80 million. These events would eventually lead to Justin working on Reaper in 2005 and releasing it only a year later. The first public release of Reaper came in December 23, 2005. Even before that though, Justin had built prototypes that never saw the light of day, but he does provide screenshots on Reaper's website.
It's not that they had never seen the light of day. There was a huge community. So I don't even know if you can search this stuff. Probably the Internet Wayback Machine has it, but there was a forum called Crossfade. And there were several of us looking for a DAW that would work the way we wanted to work in a recording studio. All these DAWs were, it seemed to us that most DAWs were made by people who had never been within 20 miles of a recording studio. And so we were trying to explain to the developers what it was that we actually used and what we did, how we worked. Being at Vintage, we had the conservatory right next door. So we had all the, I don't think it was Avid back then, but it was all the Pro Tools teachers and everything. And they were always there. And we just kept asking, hey, can you ask them, how about this? How about this kind of routing? How about this kind of patching? Like, can we get the stuff that we use? Where's my screwdriver? Where's my patch bay? Where's my soldering iron? And they really weren't that responsive. They're saying, Pro Tools is made into enough studios, so we don't got to worry about that kind of stuff. And the stuff was kind of archaic. I think we're still like on is it 56-bit? It's like fixed point math, and most of the other DAWs were like 32-bit or whatever. It was weird at the time. Anyways, we in Crossfade we're talking to different developers, and I had like this hand-drawn book I was like torturing everybody with. And one of the guys that we had worked with before Justin actually was the guy. Now he made Ardor, I think it's called. I think it's what's the Harrison console and SSL DAW things are based on. And he was really cool. He was more making something like Cubase. It was more of a MIDI sequencer type of thing. But I didn't know until a recent DAW Bench podcast that this guy was actually one of the founders of Amazon. So just like Justin, we didn't know we're talking to this like bajillionaire or whatever. And so that's how that was. So it wasn't that it never saw the light of day. Reaper got extensively used by a community of absolute hardcore solder jockey audio engineer maniacs before version 1. By the time version 1 was out, it was pretty set.
Only a couple weeks after it was released, it got the ability to load VSTs, which we take for granted now. This version had a pretty capable mixer, automation.
We could run VSTs pretty early on. I don't think it was after the release of 1 that let you do VSTs. We were doing VSTs very early.
Multiple tracks, and pretty basic MIDI support. You could see Justin's vision in the first release of wanting to put the consumer above all else. No bells and whistles, just clean and plain what was needed to produce music.
I wouldn't say no bells and whistles. That's the thing. It had bells and whistles the other DAWs just didn't have, especially again on the routing. And remember, it's okay. I'm going to my own horn here. It's definitely not just Justin. Justin programmed this thing. This was a lot of yours truly's design here.
Of course, this would change over time, but I think he succeeded in sticking true to his original reason for creating Reaper. Many updates would happen very rapidly during the first phase of Reaper.
Very rapidly. It still happened far more rapidly than most DAWs, but at the beginning, man, you could see 2 or 3 releases in the same day. It was nuts.
Including adding MIDI control surface support, ability to render MP3 files, and the ability to change tempo of your projects with automation. People who started using Reaper early on were fans of its simple approach and the fact that everything loaded so quickly.
It wasn't, okay. Again, wasn't a simple approach. A lot of people used Reaper because it had such extensive routing that they couldn't get with their other DAWs. Reinsert was a big part. Reroute, these kind of things. Some of these came in later, but if you watch the very original Reaper videos that I made, ancient videos, you'll see that what brought a lot of people in was that you could all of a sudden do the things you were used to doing in a recording studio with the screwdriver, with the patch bay, with the soldering iron, whatever, you could actually do in Reaper. And that's why a lot of people use it. But yes, it loads faster, is far more efficient. I mean, DAW Bench still uses it as the standard to judge performance. That's where Justin really shined. He was just made this thing outperform all the other DAWs, like insanely amounts.
It received improved reverb algorithm as well as some improvements to its basic MIDI editing window. And lastly, one of the most impressive features would be Re-EQ, which was an unlimited band EQ. Looking through the version history, and thank God Justin provides this on the Reaper website, it is sort of insane the amount and frequency of updates he pushed out for this.
Yeah, so again, it's not somebody who's playing catch up. This is somebody who's leading the field and putting in new features and just doing it at an insane pace. So don't say it's because you let it out for free because you got to have people know the name. I mean, that's just so far from the truth.
Program. We'd only need to wait a measly year for Reaper to get its next large update. Version 2 would be the release that saw some of the most important core additions to Reaper that we all take for granted in DAWs nowadays. We notice the thing that got so many engineers. So there was a joke early on in Reaper that Reaper was the official DAW of the American Association of Retired Persons, because the forum was like 50 years old and older people. There's tons of old curmudgeon engineers using this thing. And one of the reasons was, and they didn't really show this in this video yet, right from the start, before even Reaper 1, you could do real side chains. Like you could really send, your kick drum to your bass compressor and side chain it and do all that kind of stuff. The internals, every track in Reaper at the time, I think had
128 internal channels inside every channel. So you could do, it was really like having a patch bay and then some.
Different modes
And
for
they didn't show that. So they're already on Reaper 2, but the core things that got people onto this thing, they didn't really talk about here. Which is okay. It may not be that important to other people, but it was very important to us.
elastic pitch, which lets you stretch a sample out without losing quality or tone. And on top of that, Reaper received its
I
own
wouldn't say you don't lose quality or tone. You do lose, but it's just not that bad.
pitch shifting plugin called RePitch to complement its vocal tuning plugin called Retune. This release would also contain a large expansion of the mixer window, making it so you could view your effects and sends more easily. Looking back through images of Reaper at this point versus what it looks like now, it's clear Justin cares deeply about the efficiency and features of Reaper rather than
Yeah, form follows function. Not just Justin. That's a very much pipeline audio thing.
its style. It had come into its own by now, and most visual changes would be subtle, as the workflow had been well established. This version would
This is when we met White Tie, all right? So that's why this is starting to look pretty.
also bring 3 new plugins, which were Redelay, Revoice, and Revocode. The delay plugin was, as its name suggests, just a plugin to generate delays. Revoice was a pitch shifting plugin for vocal performances that can be controlled with MIDI, and the vocoder was a simple modulation vocoding plugin. During 07 and 08, Reaper saw a huge surge in popularity as it had gained enough features and stock sounds to compete with its peers and was extremely affordable. On top of all that, Reaper was also capable of using to generate delays. Revoice was a pitch shifting plugin for vocal performances that can be controlled with MIDI, and the vocoder was a simple modulation vocoding plugin. During 07 and 08, Reaper saw a huge surge in popularity as it had gained enough features and stock sounds to compete with its peers.
It never had any stock sounds. What are you talking about? Reaper doesn't have stock sounds. No stock sounds. There's no stock sounds. Reaper's not a sequencer. Reaper's a DAW. I don't. And it's the feature. It wasn't the features that brought us in here. It was, a lot of it was SOS. Honestly, the SOS guys jumped in there, really helped. But I mean, again, it's no joke that this was the official DAW of the AARP. The older recording engineers were jumping all over this. It was a lot of it was the Radar guys as well. Also the Paris guys. Paris, the old Paris DAW, they were kind of left orphaned, and we made sure that they were easily welcomed aboard.
And was extremely affordable. On top of all that, Reaper was also capable of using its MIDI editor in drum mode, so you could attach multiple sounds into one window to create your patterns more easily. One of the other benefits to Reaper was that early on, it was compatible with both Mac and Windows, getting many updates for Mac during this time to
Yes, Reaper was cross-platform, and in a way that made people jealous. And remember, when all this M1 came out and stuff, and everybody's like, oh, wait, when's it going to become M1 native and Apple Silicon native? Reaper was Apple Silicon native, like, immediately. It was pretty crazy. You guys want to talk about Rosetta? And I saw a bunch of the Smooth Brains over on Glenn's channel asking, when is Reaper going to be stop just being Rosetta compatible? Dude, read the version history.
Remain competitive with Logic. Unlike its older brother FL Studio, who took nearly 20 fucking years to add Mac support. It's okay, FL, I still love you. Anyways, I highly
While we're talking about FL Studio, during the early days of Reaper, we were talking to the Fruit Loops guys, and they called them Fruity Loops back then. So many of the Reaper guys wanted to use Fruity Loops. And so, we had reroutes. You could actually go in and out of other DAWs pretty easily, as long as they were ASIO. But the Fruity Loops guys were so smart. They're like, hey, we're going to make our DAW so that it can be run as a VST. And it did. So you could just run it as a plugin inside Reaper. It was so cool. Like, you think you're going to have this big, huge fight between the developer of Fruit Loops and the developer of Reaper? No. Fruit Loops guys, I think they're called Image Line. Is that the name? They were so cool. And they're just like, hey, if people want to use Reaper, have them use Reaper. We'll run as a plugin inside your DAW. Here you go. And that was genius, man. We still have so many Fruity Loops users to this day.
I recommend watching the interview that Sonic Scoop did with Justin in 2015, as he gives some insight into his reasoning for wanting to create Reaper and his background with music and software. Only around a year later, we'd see Reaper 3 come out on May 22, 2009. This was the version that saw many functional updates, like getting separated automation lanes in the playlist and being able to have multiple projects open with tabs. Many improvements would also come to the MIDI editor, allowing you to edit multiple items in one place and being able to edit inline. Visually though, the default theme became much darker and muted, making Reaper look a lot more modern. On top of that, the little Grim Reaper icon was no more, sadly. I kinda like that little guy, but instead we have an old iteration of the current guitar pick-esque icon that was gray instead of colored. Something I haven't mentioned until now was the fact that Reaper is absurdly lightweight. The entire size of the uncompressed program for version 3 was under 100 megabytes.
When we were first showing Reaper, the Reaper could fit on a floppy disk. If any of those actually existed anymore, which they probably didn't at the time, but Reaper would fit on a floppy. It was smaller than 1.44 megs.
Something I can definitely appreciate with programs and games getting larger and larger as time goes on. Along with automation lanes, version 3 would also come with the ability to copy and paste automation from different parameters, so you no longer needed to manually edit each one. We'd also get many performance updates to Reaper's sampling plugin called Resamplematic 5000. It's a pretty capable sampler with all of your necessary functions like pitch, attack, or release, although it's definitely not as advanced as something like Alchemy from Logic. Like I had mentioned before, version 3 had many functional updates, and most of the stock plugins like EQ, delay, and reverb were upgraded to work smoother and better overall. I installed all the versions of Reaper just to see what they were like to use, and by this version, Reaper had come into its own and was definitely on its way to becoming a fully stacked DAW. Reaper 4 would come only 2 years after version.
Yeah, well, let's, before Reaper was even one, was mixing an album at Cherokee with Chester Bennington. So, it had come into its own before it was even released.
Version 3, but something interesting outside the program would also happen, and that was the Reaper blog. This blog would detail the happenings at the time related to the music software industry, Reaper itself, and also included some news posts and tutorials.
Wow,
part of this blog was also showing off artists who had created music with Reaper to not only give them promo, but to show off what could be done with the software. One of those artists was Camellia, who has a YouTube channel and makes insanely high BPM mishmashes of dubstep, drum and bass, and trap. Apologies if I pronounced the name wrong. Aside from that, version 4 would also receive some new plugins, one of which being Resurround, which is a digital multi-speaker panning plugin that supported an unlimited number of virtual speakers. This would also mark a point in time where you could...
Yeah, see, again, so early on, people are like, what's the top sample rate you can support? Reaper didn't have one. Whatever sample rate you want to use, if it exists, Reaper will run it. How many tracks you want to run? What's the limit? There is no limit in Reaper. So it's just crazy because there was, Reaper was crazy efficient, but if there wasn't a reason to have a hard limit of something, Justin just didn't want it. We will just, won't have a limit, period, which was just absolutely awesome. So of course, Resurround's going to have unlimited speakers, right? And now we're talking about like this, Atmos. They're like, oh yeah, but we were unlimited way back in the day.
Create your own themes for Reaper, something I believe other software sorely needs. Thank God FL Studio is adding this in version 21. There's something very freeing about being able to customize the programs you use to your liking and style, just like how people customize their phone screens or desktop backgrounds to be personalized. We'd also see a big improvement to the stem rendering capabilities, which if you're not a producer, stems are each different audio track being rendered out as a separate sound file like WAV or MP3. This is useful because it allows engineers...
Actually, wait. Version 1 allowed you to consolidate and export, I think. You were definitely able to export in a way to share with the Pro Tools guys before version 1 was released. So I'm not sure which update he's talking about here.
And producers to work on tracks without needing any of the plugins associated with each track, since they're baked into the rendered file. Lastly, this version would mark the point at which the Reaper logo would be finalized and still looks like what we see today in version 6. Reaper 5 would come 4 years later on August 12th, 2015.
By now I was already back in Hawaii, where I am now, and physically very, very far from Justin. I think he moved to New York by now as well.
To the patch notes of this version, an absurd amount of fixes and performance updates would come along with version 5. If you're at all interested in this type of stuff, I highly recommend going to Reaper's website and looking through their version history, along with downloading any old version you want to mess with.
Yeah. Just remember, if you download the pre-release, like 0.99, 0.98, whatever, I was making albums at Cherokee studios in LA. Like, let's see, is there a list of albums recorded at Cherokee? Not just Cherokee, but other ones. Let's see. Cherokee Studios. I see Steely Dan, David Bowie, Journey, Toto, Michael Jackson, Van Halen, Guns N' Roses. This studio was, there's maybe one of these days we'll tell the story about the day we actually met in Meat Space, and Justin coded a lot of the routing stuff for Reaper right in front of the staff. It was absolutely nuts. Like as fast as any normal human being could just smash on a computer keyboard, he was spitting out code. It was mind-blowing. So, I mean, even before version 1, it was being used in some crazy top studios in the world. So
The best part, all these old versions are free to download. Anyways, version 5 would be the first time we saw support for VST3 plugins. VST3 is important because it marked a time where VST plugins got a huge performance boost using much less of your computer's resources, which works in tandem with Reaper's lightweight approach to music production. They're also more accurate with automation and sample rate, and best of all, allow for resizing of plugins where the interface scales with size. It may not seem like a big deal, but holy shit does it suck having a tiny plugin on a 4K monitor that can't be changed in size. In terms of new plugins though, we get probably
to be fair, there were some resizable plugins before, but it wasn't really a part of the spec.
the coolest feature in Reaper, and that's the addition of Super 8. Now, before we get into what this plugin does, I think
everybody uses Reaper in a different way. If you're a sampler guy, I guess this is really cool. And if you actually go to Justin's channel and watch, he does so much stuff with this Super 8 thing. I don't know how the hell to use a looper. I've never used a looper in my life. I watched the reggae guys over here doing it. In fact, last night at a party, at a birthday party, this guy actually was opening for Capenna. He just used a looper and made drum noises with his mouth and made a loop on his guitar, and he played all night. It was actually really cool. And Justin actually does this kind of stuff. Go to his channel. Just look for Justin Frankel on YouTube, and you'll see him using Super 8. I never use this thing, but Justin actually meant for Reaper to be an instrument, not just a DAW.
I think it's important to mention something else here. Super 8 is a JS plugin, which is a Reaper native plugin that only works within Reaper, unlike
No, that's not true. Using ReJS, you can use JS plugins outside of Reaper. Let me show you. One second. So in the replugs, ReJS, you can it's like a host for using JS plugins outside of Reaper. And if you guys really, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find this, but I'll show you where GS came from. Does Jesus Sonic? So Jesus Sonic, it's a Crucifix 5000. It was Justin's own pedal board he made. Let me see if I could actually find it. Wow, 2005. Let's see if this actually shows it. Here it is. There you go. There's the Jesus Sonic Crucifix effects processor. So Justin made this thing. Man, see, I tell you guys are genius, right? He made this thing way back in the day. Absolutely awesome. Crucifix 5000, man. So that's where the JS plugins came from.
VSTs. All of your JS plugins in Reaper have the option to view the actual code of the plugin written in ReScript and is modified.
Now, this was from version 1. You could do this right away in Reaper, I think. You can see your actual code of the plugin you're using, and you can actually see the values that are present at the time. You could code these plugins in real time inside Reaper. I mean, and you want to talk about catch-up? Who else does anything like this?
Modifiable. It's pretty insane that you're allowed to modify plugins on the code level for your liking if you know what you're doing. Unfortunately, I have no idea how to write computer code, but still I have not seen this feature in any other DAW. Anyways, Super 8 is essentially a cell-based looping plugin that lets you have 8 different loops within it that can be messed with to your liking.
Now, I haven't seen him talk about Ninjam. Ninjam was what led to Reaper. It was like it was an early version of play with other people across the net, and he called it fake time because you're actually like a measure behind, or a cycle behind. So it says NINJAM stands for Novel Intervallic Network Jamming Architecture for Music. And if you look, this is very much the early version of Reaper right here, right? You got your faders and real simple checkboxes for mute and solo and stuff. Okay.
We'd wait another 4 years, and on December 3rd, 2019, Reaper 6 would come out, which is the current version in the modern day. Many upgrades to the stock plugins like Sample-O-Matic, EQ, and Reverb would come along with version 6. All of the user interface now scaled properly, so you could work on non-common resolutions and Reaper would display correctly. It also received some nice updates to the mixer, like being able to horizontally scroll rather than being displayed in its native arrange view, as well as being able to group and label your effects.
Just one point. You pop this up. This is just a pedantic point. I'm not sure. Maybe this video was made a lot earlier than when was this video made? If you look here, Reaper's up to version 7 now. It's not version 6.
We'd also see a new way to edit with Reaper's Razor Edit feature that allows you to draw, move, copy, or transform the selected media, whether it's samples, MIDI, or automation envelopes. It was a total blast looking at one of the new kids on the block when it comes to music software. It's so clear to me how much Justin cares about this program, and I would 100% suggest you guys give Reaper a shot if you're into music production or thinking about starting out. It's a super easy DAW to jump into and learn. It's not overly complex, it's not too bare bones, it's sort of like that one fairy tale with Goldilocks and the soup that's just right. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Reaper with me. Thank you guys for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.